1,400 years ere seed sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. Welcome to the show. Today, we are going to discuss a paper from the gentleman that is here on the screen, from Professor Munther Younes. And the question is going to be, did he actually solve a mystery from some verses in the Quran which make currently no sense after over 1,000 years? So I think the answer is yes. Maybe he has solved them, or he is getting us much, much closer to that final answer. So we're going to go over his paper. We're not going to read the whole thing. The link will be in the description for anyone who wants to actually read the whole thing. And it's certainly worth a read. So we will just go through the highlights. Then there is a particular element that he mentions during his thesis that I think is very relevant to other things that we have discussed. So by the end of the show, we are going to actually take part of his thesis, apply that to some of the work that we have done, and we're going to leave this with you to decide if this actually enhances our thesis, if we got it right or we got it wrong. So without further ado, let's go and see this gentleman and what he has for us. So first of all, here, Munther Younes had this conversation with the one and only Gabriel Reynolds. So here is the actual video where he actually speaks about all of this stuff. It's certainly recommended. Make sure that you actually watch that. And let's see. Well, Munther Younes is Rice Senior Lecturer of Arabic Language and Linguistics and Director of the Arabic program in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Cornell University. He's the author of the Routledge Introduction to Quranic Arabic and the Arabiyyat al-Nas textbook series. So he is not just a scholar, but an Arabic speaker, and he teaches Arabic, and he seems to be a beast in all of this. So who is better than him at trying to figure out if there are some verses that are mistranslated? So let's have a look. Now, let me actually just share his paper. One sec, bear with me. And here we go, I think. Did I click on the right thing? Yes, okay, here we go. So this is the name of the paper, Charging Steeds or Maidens Doing Good Deeds. So our interpretation of Surah 100 of the Quran. He goes over the first 5 verses. There are a few more. Once we have gone through his paper and his rendering, we're going to have a look at the full surah and see if it makes sense. The verses that he has now re-rendered with the rest of the surah, and we're going to try and provide a little bit more of background and hopefully get a bit closer to the answer of that mysterious surah. For anyone who is new to the channel and is thinking, hang on a minute, what does this man mean by trying to reinterpret a particular surah? I thought that the Quran was perfectly preserved, is very clear in very clear Arabic, and so on. Well, if you're new to the channel, well, make sure that you like and subscribe and all of those nice YouTube things. If you have been around for a while, you would already know that that's not the case. The Quran was very much not perfectly preserved. And if you go and look at the Qira'at, for example, you will see how they have many, many problems when it was about knowing what the verses said. So now Professor Younes is following a very similar approach to, well, Gunther Lulling, and here at the beginning of the paper, he obviously talks about him, and also Christoph Luxemburg, maybe if not here in a little while. So I'll say his approach is very similar to a degree to what Christoph Luxemburg was doing, which is going back to Al-Tabari, who actually put together the interpretations of scholars up to that point, and having a look at what scholars said about many different verses. When they all agreed, all of those scholars, then that would mean that probably there was there was consensus, everybody knew what it meant, and there is nothing to worry about. But when they get to some verses and the scholars didn't understand what it was written, and they were trying to figure it out and trying to explain things away, Christoph Luxemburg would say, okay, so that means that's probably Syriac. And we need to look at the Syriac, and like this, we solve the problem. Munther Younes follows a different approach. He takes that information, but he asks the question, is it possible that this is simply still Arabic? They just put the dots in the wrong places. So basically, we will get to that. Or is it possible that it is an older version of Arabic, like Old Arabic, but it is still Arabic? So I think his approach is incredibly important and powerful, because we cannot conclude that everything that doesn't make sense in the Quran is because it is Syriac. It could be from different languages, it could be borrowings, but it could be as well some form of mistranslated Arabic or dialect or a dialect or something like that. So let's go and see what he says. So I'm not going to actually read everything that he writes. As I said, it's actually worth reading the whole thing, but we're going to just go with the summary. So, comment from Professor Younes here. Some scholars have taken the enigmatic nature of these verses, these ones and others, as evidence of the superior nature of the language of the Quran. Now, we have all heard that when Muslims will say the Quran is perfect, nobody can create surahs like this, so it is perfect. And that's kind of like a very lazy answer. It's like pointing at the Muqatta'at, these mysterious letters at the beginning of 29 surahs in the Quran, and saying that proves that it comes from God. And it's like, of course not. It just proves that they used to have meaning, and they translated this so many times that they lost the meaning. That is the obvious answer. So obviously saying that there are enigmatic verses and it is because of the superior nature of the language is like, of course not. Okay, so there's always another explanation. So here Professor Younes says that the first 5 verses, which are the ones he is going to analyze for us, what is it? So he has examined the first 5 verses of Surah 100 to find out if other reasons may lie behind the difficulty in understanding them. And then here he mentions Gunther Lulling, Christoph Luxemburg, and a little bit more. So he says as well that editors started with an unpointed text of the Uthmanic Mus'haf. The Mus'haf from the Uthmanic Mus'haf was without any dots and dashes and things like that. And if you look at an ancient manuscript from the 7th century, you will see how it doesn't have dots and it doesn't have dashes. Those things are introduced later. He actually gives us here an example, like these 2 words. They are very different in English. The first one starts with za, and the second one starts with ra. But in the 7th century, that would have been written in exactly the same manner, because the difference between the two would be on this letter here, whether having a dot or not. But the dots had not been invented yet, so they would have looked identical. We'll see a little bit more of that in a minute. So let's have a look at what these verses are normally rendered as right now. Pretty much depending on the translator, of course. So those are the verses. It would go something like, by these northern courses, striking sparks of fire, and scoring to the raid at dawn, then therewith with their trail of dust, cleaving as one the center of the foe. I mean, does that make sense? 21. Well, let's actually just unpack it. So it's supposed to be about horses just running into battle. And when you read tafsirs, you will get things. I think it is about Muhammad entering Mecca on the she camel and then going to war or something. Okay, never mind, because that's not what it says. So what does Professor Younes says? Since none of these tafsirs, which he actually detailed before, which we're not going to read, since none of these tafsirs is comprehensive, I have concluded my examination with the interpretation given by Tabari, the earliest comprehensive and systematic tafsir available. Great. So let's see what else he has for us. With the first verses, just to show very quickly, like some of the explanations that these early writers actually said about these verses, about the meaning. This is a very similar approach to what Christoph Luxemburg did. And if anyone has read Christoph Luxemburg's book, you will be familiar with this approach, actually having one verse and then saying what tafsir writers actually wrote very early on. So This one, the first verse, what do we get? We get one guy saying is about the horses barking. Another one, the horses went out in the morning on the raid until they barked. They blew the breath out of their mouths so that they produced a barking like that of the fox. Interesting. Another guy, it is the horses and it is the sound of their breathing when they run. Interesting. Another guy, the horses running until they bark. Comment from Tabari, summarizing the options of previous authorities. Tabari explains that that word refers to horses, and the other word, it means the sound that they make, this barking sound. Professor Younes goes into detail as to why that doesn't make sense, but again, that's for anyone who wants the full detail of this. It will be on in the description, so make sure that you read the whole thing. Next verse. So one guy says that it means the malice of men. This thing here means the malice of men. Interesting. The next guy, they, the horses, light the stones with their hooves. That's a bit different to the malice of men. Next one, they, the horses, spark fire with their hooves and the stones. The next one, they made fire with their hooves. And another one, it refers to man's malice. Interesting. Tabari keeps the door open to many interpretations. So much for the clear book in clear Arabic when the early scholars couldn't actually make sense of the verses. Isn't that interesting? So, next verse, that one there. One says it refers to the horses in the fight. Another one doesn't mention anything. Another one, the horses raided the enemy in the morning. Right. Another one, they raid in the morning. Tabari offers two interpretations. Horses riding the enemy in the morning. In the other, two camels taking their riders from Gam to Mina on the day of sacrifice. Interesting. And also Tabari adds that Zayd ibn Aslam treated this verse simply as an oath that does not require interpretation. That's always very, very convenient. Now, the fourth verse, we have this guy, no mention, next guy, no mention, the next guy, they stirred up that word, which we're going to see what it means in a minute, in the dirt with the running of their hooves. So, next guy, al-nak, so this word is dust or dirt. By saying, bihi nakah, he, Allah, means in the valley, which is interesting. There is no mention of a valley anywhere. So by saying bihi, it has to be understood as, okay, it has to be the valley. Remember, this is supposed to be the very clear book in very clear Arabic. And then you have something like bihi, which nobody knows what it means. So you have to make it up. The next guy, they raised dust in it. And that word actually means dust. Right. So what does Tabari says? Tabari explains that the third person singular pronoun, ha, of bihi refers to the valley. Now, how would he even know that? That's very, very odd indeed. Next verse. One guy says it refers to those and those. Aren't we glad that we have such a great explanation about a verse by a scholar, an authority, I think they called him, refers to those and those. Great. Another guy, it means the brigade. That's phenomenal. Thank you, guys. Another guy, he doesn't mention what it is. And another guy, Gam, refers to the gathering of the enemy. Tabari offers three possibilities. Great. I thought that this was the very clear book in very clear Arabic, but Tabari offers three possibilities. The verse is simply an oath with no specific meaning. That's satisfying. Another option, the horses went into the middle of the crowd of people, the crowd of unbelievers, the crowd of the enemy, or the brigade, with their riders. That's cool. And the last option, that the pronoun in bihi refers to Mozdalifa. It's like, how do you reach these conclusions, guys? So Tabari seemed to be a little bit confused. Now, problems with the surah from Professor Younes. One wonders why 5 verses with a total of 12 words should require so much interpretation with conflicting views and no satisfactory answers to some key questions. And then he puts the questions. Actually, what I would add to that is precisely for this reason that he mentions. The Quran, when we look at things like the Muqatta'at, there are disjointed letters. If something doesn't make sense in the middle of a verse, it is very easy for people to make sense of it, to add the dots in the right places, and to make a cohesive sentence at the very least. The problem is we have, for example, this muqatta'at, this unknown sequence of letters at the beginning of surahs. They wouldn't have the context. So the meaning of those were lost because they don't have a context to try to make sense of them. So when we have a surah like this one, which is supposed to stand on its own, you don't have anything from before that gives you the context. If this was in the middle of a surah that was talking about Moses in Egypt, the readers, they would have something to go by. They would think, okay, let's look at this rasam, anything to do with Moses, anything to do with Pharaoh, and they would be able to figure it out. But when you have a surah like this, it's supposed to stand on its own. You don't have anything around it that helps you understand the meaning. So the reason why it requires so much interpretation and nobody knows what it is for that reason. It's supposed to stand on its own, and that's already a problem. Here, Professor Younes also says that Pickthall says the meaning of the first 5 verses is by no means clear. The above is a probable rendering, as in the how people are trying to understand it. It's just a probable rendering. Basically, they're trying to figure it out. And the end of this section, the problems that we have with these verses are of 2 types: syntactic and lexical. The first category includes one phenomenon, and the second, 3 lexical items. So, because this is now going to get into the technical elements, we're going to go through this very, very quickly. And for those who are very interested in those sort of things, really read the whole paper and you will see. It is absolutely wonderful. So, let's see. We have here then, first, this syntactic problem. The reference of the pronoun in verse 4. So that one is be he. We have seen in a number of verses before where it says be he and it actually means in him or by him, and it happens to be about Jesus. In here it says be he, so I would think, oh, is it possible that it's something to do with Jesus? But certainly it is not explained as to what this be he is, hence why Professor Younes says, well, we have a problem there. We just don't know. Then he explains that for a while, and you can actually read all of the different explanations for it. Ooh, even Kathir. So then we go to lexical problems. This is an interesting one. Professor Younes writes, of the 12 words in the 5 verses under discussion, 6 are hapax legomena. That means words that appear only once in the Quran, only once. Now, those things happen a lot. If you go to the Bible, there will be lots of words that appear only once. And in the works of Shakespeare, the same, there will be words that appear only once. There is nothing to worry about that, except that when they appear in a cluster, in just a handful of verses, it is very dodgy. When you have words that appear only once, normally they are more spread out and not in this way. That is perhaps a bit of an indication that they didn't know how to read these things and they were trying to make up words in order to justify the reading of the verses. Then Professor Younes says, in at least one case, this one, nak'a, a word is used with a meaning not found in the language outside of this surah. So a word that doesn't exist in Arabic anywhere except for this surah. That's interesting. And then in other cases, a clear attempt is made by the commentators to force a meaning to fit the context of the surah. We will see more of that. But in other words, what Professor Younes is saying is they're just making it up. They're just making it up, guys, because they need to force an interpretation. Okay, so let's see here what he says about some of these words. So behind the various interpretations and conflicting views of the word dabha, one can discern a clear attempt to link the verb dabha, meaning to bark, to the running horses. This attempt reaches absurd levels when the other meaning of dabaha, to change color as a result of burning, is used to impose an alternative interpretation where a comparison is made between the change in the color of a burned object and the change in the condition, presumably of horses, from fright, fatigue, and greed. Basically, they're making it up. They're really trying to figure it out. And I'm sorry for my very lack of Arabic. So let's continue. What else do we have here? And very soon we're going to actually reach his actual conclusion of what these verses actually mean. Then we're going to compare them, or we're going to see them with the rest of the surah, which he doesn't re-render because it seems to be okay. And let's see if it actually makes more sense than the original meaning. So again, there is a clear attempt to force a meaning on a word that it does not have outside of the verse in question. Wow. And to sum up, the claims that that word is a sound made by horses or camels, that that word is a spark produced by running horses or even camels, and that the third word refers to dust, have no foundation in the Arabic language. These claims are used to provide an explanation where one founded on sound linguistic principles is not possible. So we have three words almost back to back to back to back, which they just have to make them up because they don't make any sense. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know in the comment section below if there is something from this paper that you would like to actually see more detail or comment on, or if you read things that I haven't actually highlighted here and you think they are very important in order to understand his thesis better. And make sure that you like, subscribe, all of those things. Okay, so let's carry on. An alternative account. As noted, there was a period when the written text of the Quran was represented by a consonantal skeleton, in which most vowels and hamza, that one is very important, were not present. Here we have some examples. So when we have Ra and Zai, they looked identical in the 7th century. It is only later when they introduced the dots where you can actually distinguish them. The same happens with Sin and Shin, and with Ba, Ta, Tha, Nun, and Ya, and particularly when they're in the middle. In the initial or final positions, they could be a little bit different, but for the most part, they look identical. So you need the dots to tell them apart. Now, anyone who has actually heard, but people knew how to recite these things. No, we will go through a little bit of what Professor Younes says about that, but anyone can actually go and look at the Qira'at and you will know that that's not the case. That didn't happen. So the first verse. In here you have how he writes it, the original, or what is now written, and what he's saying that he believes it would have been read as initially. And even if you don't speak the language, you will see that there are some very tiny differences. It's like that game that we all did, these puzzles when we were kids. Find the differences. So if you look at them, you will see that, oh, look, there is one little dot in here. Okay, and there is no dot in there. And then in here, there is no dot in here, and there is a dot in here. So those sort of little things, just by moving a couple of dots, or in this case, removing one and adding one, how the verse will actually make sense. The new rendering would have nothing to do with horses, and he puts forward that it would mean they, which is in the feminine form, so they, women, are going out in the morning. So probably you are starting to see why this paper is called Charging Steeds, or maidens doing good deeds. So the first re-rendering, after he has established problems with the words, we see that we have another plausible answer that actually makes sense. It's a sentence that makes sense. Okay, so let's carry on. Then we get to verse 4. When changing the hamza to a madda in the first word and removing a dot from the kaf of the third produces a different phrase. So the hamza is that thing there in the hamza bearer, That's the thing in there. And you see how there is a spread. That's the madda. And the other one is here. You will see, probably you can actually see that there are like 3 dots. One is with the little pig, and then the other two. The other two signify that this is kaf. And in here, we then have 1 dot on the little pig. That one remains. But instead of having 2 on top of the kaf, there is 1, which means it's a fa. So just very minor changes. And the rasam, how this was written in the 7th century, it was identical. There was no difference. So he is just changing literally 1 dot and then the hamza thing. So the new rendering would be, and they, again, female form, and they chose, preferred, favored by doing it to perform or render a good deed. Okay, so that's interesting. Nothing to do with horses. Let's see what happens next. Let's see what happens next. Did I highlight anything else? Oh, yes, all the way down here. So the next one, that as used in the Surah, this word here, we see here, is typically glossed as a spark produced by the hooves of running horses. Then Professor Younes says, in biblical Hebrew and in Syriac, one of the main meanings of that root, aka that word, is fire, kindling fire. Okay, cool. So we can see, by the way, why we would have this very weird rendering about a spark produced by the hooves of running horses, if in other Semitic languages it means something to do with fire. So, not too far, not too far off. But then we have another problem. This other word here, translated or glossed as going into the middle, which then is, well, into the middle of the enemies. So the horse is actually just charging into the enemy. Okay, so let's see what he says. In biblical Hebrew and in Syriac, we have different meanings. In biblical Hebrew, it means to extend or to hold out. And in Syriac, it means to hold out, stretch out, to be offered, presented, to advance, and to reach forward, stretch forward, offer, grow up, make progress, succeed, be advanced, especially in dignity. Okay, so quite a bit of a difference. Nothing to do with, what was it about the middle, going into the middle. Very different. And also, by the way, why would it be important to actually look at the meaning of words in Hebrew or in Syriac? Well, those were languages actually used in the region as the lingua francas. It was Syriac for the most part, and certainly the languages used in theology. I don't think that you would have many conversations in Arabic. It was probably not as developed to have very deep words, and you would probably end up borrowing from Hebrew or Syriac. And in some of the shows, we have seen those cases, such as with Shekinah. So we continue. So then this word here, what Professor Younes says is, well, it appears in a number of places. And in Surah 2, verse 238, is excluded because of the complete lack of agreement over its interpretation. Okay, cool. So then we're looking at the other 3 instances, which he actually lists here. And in those discussed above, strongly suggest the meaning is best, favored, preferred, or chosen, right? As opposed to middle. And we can see here, we see that that meaning makes actually more sense than the one that they are saying that means going into the middle or something to do with the middle. Then he writes here 2 of those verses. We made you a favored nation as opposed to a middle nation. So I think favored nation works better. And also feeding 10 needy people from the best food that you feed your people, as opposed to feeding 10 needy people from the middle that you feed your people, you see. So I think he's right. It needs to mean something along those lines. Now, in this section, will be interesting for anyone who wants to understand a little bit more, like, will it be foreign borrowing like Christoph Luxemburg or Gunther Luring would propose and saying it is from Syriac, or could it be an actual Old Arabic form? Okay, so he writes about that for a bit, and that's up to you. I think it is important to have all of the different options available, and then finding the answer in that way, as opposed to just concluding one thing immediately and saying, okay, this is the answer. So it could be Arabic, could be Syriac, but we need to consider all of the options. Now let's continue. Verse 3. The third verse of the surah is a good candidate for what Luling calls second sense Quran text, a verse that was added by the Quran editors to obscure the original text and give it a new meaning. Once the theme of charging steeds was established at the beginning of the surah, it was possible to continue with the same imagery. Now, that's possible, and I have heard from quite a few scholars this thesis in many different verses that they just seem to change the topic completely. They begin saying one thing, being very nice and peaceful, and then all of a sudden you have a verse in the middle that changes everything. So they put forward, okay, that may have been a late insertion, for example, in order to push a narrative. The thing is that is incredibly difficult to prove because, well, I haven't seen that in any ancient manuscripts. When I have looked at manuscripts from the 7th century, I'm yet to find one of those verses that are completely missing. We can see many words missing here and there. We can see that from the Qira'at, the work done by Shadi Nasser, but a whole verse, I still haven't seen it. That might actually be found when we analyze the Sana palimpsest. Maybe the bottom layer will give us a few more clues, but so far, even though it is very likely that this thing will happen, would have happened, I don't think it could ever be proven because any documents that we could use as evidence, those documents, I think they're probably gone. So all of the ones that we have now, they would have the full set of verses. So we can speculate, but we don't have the evidence unless, we find a new Quran hidden, buried in the sand somewhere, and then we have all of these answers. So I think it is very unlikely, but okay, it most likely happened, and it is very likely that we cannot prove it because we just don't have it. We can actually just go with circumstantial evidence. Then, okay, I'm going to explain this very briefly because I'm going to bring this up at the end of the show when we're going to use this next thing that Professor Younes talks about with one of the verses that we have seen on the channel. What he talks about, the best I understand it, this goes way over my head, is the rhythm of the Quran. Like when we think about rhythm, or at least me, because I'm European, I think about rhymes like poetry when I studied that at the school, and all of the verses would end in following a pattern. For example, A B A B or A B B A or something like that. But not with the Quran. The Quran is like a chant, so it is about the rhythm, and that is established by short vowels and long vowels. So what he has here is consonant, short vowel, consonant, consonant, long vowel, and so on. And if I understand this correctly, he's saying that will be a pattern that is actually followed between the places where you have short vowels and long vowels. That is what makes the whole thing have this, say, wonderful structure. And that we have a problem with these verses where that pattern actually breaks, and he analyzes that rhythm and says, okay, so the rhythm is broken. That means they are not reading a word correctly. And let's actually analyze it in more detail. So I think this is where he's getting at with this. I'm not going to spend any more time. We will have a look at this in a different manner in a minute. But otherwise, I think it is probably a good way of finding problems with the Quran. It just is not within my area of expertise. So if any one of you watching, you are very good at analyzing this and you understand this part of his thesis, and you can help finding problems in the Quran by following this, please reach out because we really need you to help us with this, finding problems. And of course, like, subscribe, all those things. Okay, so now let's see what Professor Younes does when reconstructing the first 5 verses of Surah 100. This is what it looks like. Well, he has 4. I think the third one, he's saying it was inserted late, so it's ignored, I suppose. It would read something along these lines. And those female, so those women going out in the early morning and kindling a flame by which they chose to render a good deed and extend it to the multitudes. Like, okay, so if this has nothing to do with charging steeds, is talking about women going out in the morning to do something good. That's interesting. And of course, we have the problem with be he. Yes, remember always the problem with be he. You see be he somewhere in the Quran, there is a problem. Okay, cool. So, could this be an innocent mistake or it could be a deliberate manipulation? Well, Professor Younes says, in my reconstruction of Surah 100, verses 1 to 5 is correct, if it is correct, then how could the original forms have been replaced by those that became part of the Quran as we know it? Two possibilities. One is errors in the transmission of the text. And the reason being, say both renditions, the one that is currently accepted and the one that Professor Younes is putting forward, they have the same rasm. They would have been identical. There would not have been a difference between reading these as discharging steeds and about maidens doing good deeds, for instance. Of course, the words don't really make much sense, but you know what I mean. The rasm would have been the same. The thing is that this implies something important, that the Quran started as a written document, if that's the case. Now, I think that that's the case. I think the Quran started as a written document, not as Muhammad telling to his people, okay, I'm going to make you memorize a book and we're not going to write it down. Okay, that's very silly. I think the book was written down first and then it starts to spread out and things go really, really, really wrong. So, indeed, much of the variation among the 7 readers, so the first guys who basically just create the first 7 Qira'at, revolves around differences in dots. So this is his argument for maybe they started as a written document. If we look at the Qira'ats from the works of Shadi Nasser, you will see that the majority of the problems are with dots and vowels. So yes, there is actually a lot of evidence to suggest that. If it was all about oral tradition, they would have done a better job at knowing what words are in there. Then the second option is that the text was deliberately changed by the Quran editors, and that is what Gunther Lulling argues. And the support for this claim is found in the Muslim traditions, because in the Muslim traditions it says that Uthman was a very naughty boy, right? And in here I think, okay, not that section here, erasing the book of God. So Professor Younes says that one of the grievances of the people of these people against Uthman was that he erased the book of God. And there are, I think, hadiths that say that he removed the dots and people got confused and then they added them back on, which is not true because the dots didn't exist during the time of Uthman. But still, they did actually say that he's the one who erased it, and certainly the Shia Muslims will totally agree with this. And let's see, are we now on the conclusion? I think we're getting yes to the conclusion. So let's see what Professor Younes says as the conclusion of this paper. I understand that my reconstruction of Surah 100, 1 to 5, might seem random to some, and that alternative interpretations or reconstructions are possible. I would say, speaking for myself, it doesn't feel random at all. We keep seeing in the Quran things that are just mistranslated. They didn't know what the text said, and they were the equivalent of they were doing their best to make sense of it, or at the very least, to just make some words that existed and that people would recognize. So it was a bit of a mess. So it's not so random. Then he says, I also understand that the exact character of these verses in their original forms may never be known. Totally agreed. We don't even know how many steps happen before the earliest manuscripts we have. However, The strongest argument I can put forth in support of my reconstruction is that, as they stand now, these verses are highly problematic. They are. And all the interpretations and commentaries that have been proposed, which have grown longer over time and are often contradictory and speculative, have failed to address their problems. Very true. I believe that the account given in this essay brings us closer to an understanding of the structure, meaning, and character of these verses. I totally agree. I think we're going to see now these verses with the rest of the surah, and we're going to see what happens. And I think Professor Younes is either A, correct, or B, directionally correct. Maybe there are some words in there that happen to be Syriac or Hebrew, and that has to be taken into account. But otherwise, I think his rendering makes more sense than horses stampeding, using a lot of words that have nothing to do with horses or stampeding or breathing and so on. And his rendering, it makes it sound a lot more like something that you would expect to find in a book of theology. And we will see why in just a sec. So let's have a look. This is the translation as we have from Saint Murad. And the very first thing to note is this. You see these question marks? When Murad has these question marks, is because he couldn't translate those to from Arabic in the 7th century. He looked at lexicons and stuff, and he just didn't see these words as being Arabic. So he left the question mark as we don't know. Now there are two options. Very often, these question marks indicate that the word was not Arabic, and it was meant to be Syriac, Hebrew, Ge'ez, Pahlavi, whatever. Also, it's possible that the word that was written, just like Munther Younes says, that it used to be Arabic, but they put the dots in the wrong places. And of course, Murad actually follows, I think he's done his translation based on the Hafs version of the Quran. So when he sees the dots in a specific place, and then he looks for that word and says it didn't exist in the 7th century, that word just didn't exist. So he will leave a question mark. If the dots were in a different place, maybe he would have said, oh yes, this actually means women doing good deeds. But because of the dots, it just creates a word that it wasn't there. But notice how, particularly if you have his translation, you will see that question marks, more often than not, they are spread out all throughout the book. They are very rarely in clusters. They happen a lot at the end of the book for obvious reasons. But think about this. So we have Professor Younes looking at these verses here, okay? These verses, these first two lines, saying, this doesn't make any sense. There are problems here. I need to do a re-rendering. And when we look at the translation from Murad, what do we get from Murad? The same thing is these words don't exist. This is not Arabic. There is a problem here. So both of them, following very different methodologies, they have actually realized there is a problem with this. Now, the same exercise has to be done with every single part of the Murad translation where he actually adds question marks, particularly if they appear in clusters. So just notice that how we have now two Arabic speakers doing different work, reaching the same conclusions. And from Murad, we see it by this huge cluster of question marks. And Professor Younes. Now, we're going to superimpose the rendering of Munther Younes in a second. Because of the work we have done here on the channel with our brother John, which is reading the Quran through the lens of the Bible and then unlocking a lot of the hidden meaning by just doing that, I normally go with, my eyes goes to keywords almost immediately. And when I was actually reading this, so the next verses from 6 to 11, I noticed that Murad actually writes here witness and also tombs. And the re-rendering from Professor Younes is maidens going in the morning to do good deeds. So the very first thing that I thought about is, could this originally have been about Mary Magdalene, or well, they will say the women, living in the early morning on the third day after the crucifixion of Jesus to going to the tomb, and then wearing witness to his resurrection or something like this. This is where my head immediately goes. We have the word witness, we have tombs, and we have from Munther Younes that it is about maidens. Okay, maybe. One of the key problems there is that this word tombs is plural. It's just plural. You cannot make it into singular like in the case that we've seen with a dagger aleph. It is plural. You cannot make this rasam into singular. So could be other things, and we're going to see that in a minute. It's unfortunate because if this could have been singular for tomb, I think we would already have the answer. But once we have gone through the full argument, you let me know in the comment section below if there is something that we're missing here and whether it could have been about that particular story or if it is a different story. But let's see what we get. So now we're going to just add this. This is what Professor Younes has said. And those, if females, going out in the early morning and kindling a flame by which they chose to render a good deed and extend it to the multitudes. I don't know. There are a few words there that it doesn't really feel too much as Mary Magdalene and the women going to the tomb of Jesus to with perfumes and stuff. Okay, could it be? Could there be something else mistranslated in there? Other hidden words? Now let's actually have a look at just translation from Google. So instead of using the Murad translation, I have just asked ChatGPT actually to translate it literally, the next verses, word for word, with as many options as possible. And let's see what we get. So if we start from the beginning, from Professor Younes, and then the literal translation from ChatGPT, we would get, and those women going out in the early morning and kindling a flame by which they, those women, chose to render a good deed and extend it to the multitudes. Truly, the man, the human, is surely ungrateful to his Lord. Okay, well, if it's something up here, something to do with his Lord or something to do with Jesus, as we have seen in the Quran, is all about Jesus, maybe there is a little bit of a jump in there, but maybe that's the missing verse from Professor Younes. Maybe we need to analyze that one and we get more answers. Remember as well that we had a problem in verse 4 with this be he. If it is actually as well misrendered and be he should be about the Lord and it would be about Jesus, maybe we get closer to the answer. We continue. And indeed, he, and I think that he would be the Lord, and he is surely a witness over that, over people being really ungrateful. Like, yeah, that's true that. Okay, next. And indeed, he, God, is surely intense in love of the good or wealth. I think, if I remember correctly, Daif International translates that as wealth, and they would go for wealth. But remember, that I think is the same word that it is translated here as good. So surely he is intense in love of the good or the best, good people. Yes, I think probably God is intense in love of the good more than wealth. What do you think? And then we continue. Then does he, God, not know when what is in the graves has been or will be overturned? I don't know if that is actually technically correct. This is what ChatGPT said. So I think he said that based on the dots of those verbs, it could be past tense or it could be future tense. So it could be one or the other. Not really sure about that. So for now, we will go with what ChatGPT has said. So would it actually then be talking about the Lord, the Lord, the Lord? Does he not know when what is in the graves will be overturned and what is in the chests will be brought forth? It sounds a little bit like when they're saying, doesn't the Lord know the hour? And if it is all about Jesus, this would be about people saying, yes, Jesus knew the hour. There are other verses that actually confirm that. And at the end, truly, their Lord is surely fully aware of them on that day. So on that day, don't know if that would mean on the day when they are doing these things and they believe, or on the day of judgment. But what do you think? Now that we have the rendering from Professor Younes, that it is about women doing good deeds, living in the morning, kindling a fire. That's interesting. I mean, if that said, going with perfumes or something like that, or flowers, we would already have cracked it. But let me know what you think. Are there any other stories that you can think of in the Bible where you would have women going out in the morning to do good deeds and then just talking about the Lord and something with the graves, perhaps about the hour? What do you think? Hmm? I think it's actually very interesting. And the works of Professor Younes is probably getting us a lot closer. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some level of misrendering or mistranslations here in the rest of the verse, just like it was in the beginning of the verse. And by changing a few dots here and there, we get a verse that makes perfect sense and everybody will know what this is about. But that's a different story. And now, as I said before, there will be a little bit of a bonus round. And remember, I mentioned that Professor Younes talks about this rhyme, this rhythm of the Quran. So this is a verse in here, Surah 7, verse 158, which I have discussed now probably 10 times in the last 2 months, that I am like pretty sure that is all about Jesus. The previous verse is certainly talking about Jesus. So I think when it means the messenger, the Ummi prophet, is about Jesus, and that here it was telling people to believe in Allah and His word. And the only difference is that there is one little dagger aleph that makes this word into plural. So I did think, hang on a minute, we have from Professor Younes that the Quran has this rhythm where you have short vowels, long vowels, and they pretty much has to match. And this one, the problem that we have happens to be a long vowel. This dagger aleph makes the vowel long. So I did ask ChatGPT, having this dagger aleph, does it break the rhyme, the rhythm rather, or not? And ChatGPT has actually just immediately agreed with me, but it's something that I would like the community to maybe have a look at. So after asking ChatGPT, it did this analysis, which of course it goes over my head and I don't understand any of it. So let's see if you at home understand these things and the way that the Quran is supposed to rhyme or have this rhythm. So in the end, the conclusion from ChatGPT, who happens to lie a lot, it says, according to Younes's rhythmic diagnostics, and then it talks about the word kalimatihi. It doesn't mean that Professor Younes is talking about that word. It means using the same process as he details in his paper. By following that, kalimatihi introduces a long, heavy mora, the dagger aleph, that disrupts the alternation of the surrounding clauses. Replacing it with kalimatihi in the singular reestablishes the metrical harmony of the verse, perfectly matching the cadence of, and then you have here how the previous words would then rhyme. So, rhythmically and phonetically, your suspicion is completely correct. The form kalimatihi breaks the prosodic structure, kalimatihi preserves it. Now, this is ChatGPT. I don't trust ChatGPT. It lies, and very often it just tells you what you want to hear. So I don't know if this is the case or not. So if this is something that you can do at home and that you understand this particular problem, I would be very grateful if you could have a look at that and confirm or deny what ChatGPT is trying to push. For a simple reason. If this is correct and having kalimatihi breaks the rhythm of the verse, and having kalimatihi actually restores the rhythm, that would be basically the final piece of evidence that indicates a number of things. First, that this is in fact his word, which it is. I think there shouldn't be any doubt about that one. It continues with and follow him. So this is it should be obvious by now. But if that's the case and it breaks the rhythm, that would indicate that at one point they knew how to read this Quran in a way that really worked. And then that has to be replaced because of political reasons. So they would be willing to break the rhythm on a surah or in a verse in order to push a different agenda. And now we can actually go back and use this method to find places where they have actually done that, which actually it might be as simple as looking at dagger alifs that are inserted. But anyway, as I said, it's possible that all of this that is now on screen is absolute nonsense because it comes from ChatGPT, and ChatGPT doesn't understand Arabic very well, and it actually lies a lot. But if this is something that you can do, if this is something that you understand, please have a look at this verse if you would be so kind. Let me know in the comment section below if ChatGPT was telling the truth for once, or if he was, as very often it does, just lying through its teeth, virtual teeth to that. Anyway, so I think this was the show for today. I thought it was important to talk about the work of Professor Younes, because we normally just think about the same people like Gunther Luling and Christoph Luxemburg or Gabriel Sauma, who say these things make no sense. Okay, it's because it was a different language. But Professor Younes, even though he's not as well known in the community, he actually brings forth something incredibly valuable and that it needs exploration, which is, are those words Arabic? And they have always been Arabic. And the problem is they've put the dots in the wrong places, or it is from an older version of Arabic. So I think it was very, very important to discuss this so that people are aware that it is not going to be as clear cut as, okay, it's all about what Christoph Luxemburg has been talking about. The chances are it's going to be a mix. There's going to be Arabic with the wrong dots. It's going to be Syriac. It's going to be Hebrew. It's going to be a bit of everything. And only when we have all of the different pieces of the jigsaw on the table, we will be able to put together the jigsaw and see what it actually said. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this show. Make sure that you let me know any comments that you have on the comment section below. If you can fix this one for us in one direction or another, prove it or disprove it, please also do that. That would be much appreciated. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you very much for watching. Hope that you enjoyed this show, and stay well. Hopefully we will see you soon. Until then, God bless you all. Bye-bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie! 26 different Quran!
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?